Hello everyone. For different reasons, I am not going to be able to be there in person to present today. However, we decided to record this video so I could collaborate somehow. I am in charge of presenting the introduction and the theoretical framework of this article. To begin with, I would like to give you some context and explain you how everything started. With Paulina, we decided that we wanted to focus our article on oral proficiency and how this one could be improved. While we were doing our research for the theoretical framework, we found that oral proficiency could be improved through metacognitive strategies. That's why we based our theoretical framework basically on Anderson's metacognitive strategies and Swain's metalinguistic function of output. After we did that, we decided that the general objective for this study would be evaluate if students have prior knowledge of metacognitive strategies and its relation to oral proficiency. The steps that we followed in order to achieve that general objective were identify the mental process involved in the L2 oral development. Secondly, we determined the metacognitive strategies related to oral proficiency. And finally, we analyzed the use of certain metacognitive strategies that enhance speaking. Well, for the first two specific objectives, we were based on the theoretical framework. And for the analysis part, we used an instrument, which was a 12-statement survey that the participants had to complete. The participants were 6 students of an English class, which the main goal of that class is to improve the oral proficiency. That's why we decided to focus on this. The hypothesis that we had was that because of with Paulina, we thought that metacognitive strategies and its application on the EFL classroom is relatively new. So we hypothesized that probably these students, because as they are in their 40s, probably they didn't know about metacognitive strategies, thus didn't know how to apply them in order to improve their oral proficiency. Through the analysis of the results of the survey, we found out that our hypothesis was right. So Paulina will explain you later in more detail about the study itself and the findings. Well, regarding the theoretical framework, as I told you before, we based our ideas on Anderson's metacognitive strategies and Swain. Well, from Anderson, we took his ideas about metacognition and 5 components of it. He defines metacognition in very simple terms, explaining that it's everything that the students do in order to learn. It's once they partake on their learning process. And in order to do that, they have to be explicitly instructed about it, so they know about the strategies and how to use them positively for their learning process. To summarize the 5 components, I am going to explain to you each of them in a nutshell. The first component is preparing and planning for learning. So Anderson here means that this is related to the activation of prior knowledge. So when the activation of prior knowledge is there, it's easier for the students to learn, because this is the foundation from which they will build more knowledge. And he also claims that if there is no prior knowledge, it is important that students develop one. Otherwise, it will be impossible to learn. The second component, which is selecting and using strategies, has to do with the ability of choosing and using suitable strategies for certain tasks or for certain goals. It's not a matter of like one strategy works for everything. So that's why this component is very important, because the students have the ability of choosing the suitable strategies for certain situations. The third component is monetary learning, and Anderson explains that this component has to do with keeping track of the learning process. And for this, students have to take action whenever there is something difficult to do or to understand. And for this component, he claims that when students taking Krashen's ideas to complement this, we can say that when students over-monitor themselves, their fluency when speaking can be affected in a negative way. So the idea is that students monitor only enough to be accurate, but not so much that the fluency is affected, if you know what I mean. The fourth component refers to the ability of coordinating different strategies for effective learning. That's why this component is orchestrating strategies. So, for example, I'm using one strategy and now it's not working anymore, so I'm going to consider another one, or maybe both together. And for this, it is also important that students know about strategies and how to use them all together. And for that, teachers have to be very explicit about the strategies in the classroom. That's what Anderson claims. And the last component concerns the assessment of the learning performance. It's about evaluation. And Anderson remarks that successful learners are constantly evaluating how efficient their work is. And some strategies that Anderson mentions here are, for example, recording ourselves and then, for example, through a video, and then see the video and criticize the performance, for example, pronunciation, fluency, vocabulary, grammar, etc. But in such a way that is fruitful for us and not damaging. So the idea is that students are not critical in a negative way. And he also states that it is important that teachers guide students on this, and that teachers promote self-assessment in the classroom so students can partake on their learning process. So, as metacognitive is related to the way students learn and what they do, like what happens in their brains in order to learn. It's strongly related to the metalinguistic function of output of Swain. But the only difference is that metacognition could happen not only for language learning, but also for different fields of learning. So the difference is that the metalinguistic function is the reflection process, but only about the language. So that's why we wanted to also consider this for the theoretical framework. Taking Swain's ideas into account, the metalinguistic function, like in order to reach the metalinguistic function, so in order to reflect on the language, there have to be two other functions before that, which are noticing and hypothesis testing. Noticing happens whenever students feel or realize that there is something different than they used to think. They notice that there is a gap, maybe something that they don't know or something that they don't manage in the second language. So when they become aware of that lack of knowledge, there is noticing. After that is hypothesis testing. So they start testing that what they used to think about the language, like, is true or not. For example, one student thinks that the plural way of child is children's, but once he says, or after he said this word, like children's, the teacher said, hey, that is not the way, or there is something wrong, like repeat what you said, modify it. And the student think, what is wrong? Oh, so the plural form of child is not children's, it's children. Maybe this also could happen when the students hear a native speaker using the plural form of child in the correct way, and they realize that it's different than what they used to think. That is also hypothesis testing. So a hypothesis testing happens whenever students want to test what they think about the language. Through feedback, through, as I told you before, from the interlocutor, they can check if their hypotheses are correct or not. So after that, there is metalinguistic function. So taking into account the example that I told you before about the student who thought that the plural form of child was children's or child's, I've heard that too. After the noticing and hypothesis testing, there comes the reflection of it, what they did and what happened to reach to that final conclusion. When they do that, there is meta-language. They are reflecting about the language using the language. And that's why it's related to the previous one, which is metacognition and metacognitive strategies. So we also found 3 other studies that were related to our study. In very simple terms, all of them studied the relationship between instruction on metacognitive strategies and its positive effect on oral production. All the studies showed that metacognitive strategies are positive and that they help improve oral proficiency. That in all of them, oral proficiency improved, in other words. So, to sum up everything that I said, the theoretical framework was considered in order to support our hypothesis and our ideas about metacognitive strategies and output, specifically speaking in this case. And we took into consideration the theories to elaborate the instrument, which was the 12-statement survey. Now Paulina will talk about the study itself, the findings, and the conclusion. Hope I see you guys next week and enjoy the presentation. Bye!